Hello, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. This is Nora O'Brien from Connect Consulting Services. Today we're talking about disasters don't stop and the tough part about competing for resources during multiple disasters. We all know about COVID. COVID-19 is with us here to stay for the foreseeable future, but there still will be other disasters. So we've got I and my colleagues joining us today that you'll find out about in a moment to learn how to figure all the planning and training and exercising that should be going on at this point of your life to deal with all these competing disasters that are. Yeah. We want to make sure this is a question we get all the time about how to ask a question during the webinar. We do hope that you ask questions. We want to be able to assist you. The questions we get all the time are, can I get the slides? That's usually what 4 or 5 of the questions tend to be, or, can we get the slides? We want to let you know we will send the slides out after the recording, but we're also going, and then can you also get the recording? So we have made the recording available. It'll go on our YouTube channel. It's the link right there that is provided in the slide. Is our YouTube channel, so feel free to go there if you somehow didn't get the email or contact us. But also feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We certainly have only a handful of subscribers, and love to have you join us for and viewing our not just this webinar but our past webinars and into the future. So those are the questions we get all the time. So we thought we'd address it right up front. Okay. So today we're going to do introductions, and we want to welcome you all. Then you're going to get to learn a little bit about our speakers. And then Amanda Cooper is going to talk about the 3 hurricane lessons learned. In 2017. She'll go into that in detail. Anthony Hurley is going to be talking about utility challenges related to disasters and talk a little bit about his background. I'm going to talk about COVID-19 plus planning challenges, so hurricanes, wildfires, etc. And then we have time for questions, and we want to hear from you as comments as well. So, okay. So I'm Nora O'Brien. I'm in the center. This is picture of me. So I have a master's degree I'm the CEO of Connect Consulting. I have a master's degree in public affairs with a concentration of disaster and emergency management, and been in the field of emergency management for 18 years. I'm a certified emergency manager, certified by the IAEM, or International Association of Emergency Managers, and served as the chair for the healthcare caucus. I'm also a FEMA administrator, adjunct instructor, as well as both of my colleagues here. We lead the H1N1 pandemic response. I led that, and also done wildfires and hurricanes, all those other things, so different types of disasters. We are Women-Owned Business of the Year in 2018 by the Sacramento SBA. And I'm going to now give it over to Amanda to talk a little bit about her background. She's our planning specialist.
Good morning, everyone. As Nora mentioned, my name is Amanda Cooper. I am a planning specialist here at CCS. I have a master's degree in public health from the University of Alaska, and I also have a bachelor in biology. I'm a certified ADA coordinator and a certified ADA professional. I come to CCS from FEMA, where I was a senior advisor, where I served on an elite response team. It was called National Incident Management Assistance Team West. I've been a senior advisor for more than 10 federal major disasters, including Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria, and most recently the Paradise Fire, the Camp Fire in Northern California. I am a former planning section chief and public health emergency manager with the state of Alaska for about 10 years. There I focused on planning. I was an ADA advisor, and most of the focus of my work has been on planning as well as public health and planning for access and functional needs.
Great, thank you. So Tony, do you want to share a little bit about your background? Anthony Hurley.
Yes, this is Tony Hurley. I spent 37 years with a electric utility before I retired. Been working for a couple of years in the consulting world. Over my career, I have responded to 10 major hurricanes in either the East Coast, Gulf Coast, or Caribbean. And I'm going to be talking about some of the challenges coming up that a utility company faces when dealing with a major disaster.
Okay, wonderful. So that's a little bit about us, but we want to kind of get into the meat of the content today. So actually, I think we go right into Amanda's piece.
Sure, thanks, Nora. So, like I previously mentioned, I was a senior advisor for National IMAT West. National IMAT West, FEMA has two response teams that are made up of about 25 to 30 people, and we all have specialty areas, and we're reserved for the worst of the worst disasters. If you have a national team come in, you know it's going to be bad. So in 2017, we faced something that was a little unprecedented. A little backstory, before the first hurricane hit, my team was actually in Atlanta, Georgia. We were working with that region on an exercise of what would happen if a hurricane hit two different regions and they were competing for resources. So it's very ironic. So about 3 days into our exercise, we were pulled and sent to Hurricane Harvey. So I worked all 3 hurricanes. I was deployed for about 300 days straight. And if you kind of look, so we first went to Harvey. So on August 25th, 2017, Harvey was actually a remnant that they didn't expect to turn back into a hurricane, but it actually reformed and hit Texas. It made landfall kind of in the southeast region, but it hovered over Houston for a couple days, which just caused catastrophic flooding. And that, on a scale of 1 to 5, that's how they categorize hurricanes. So 1 being not so bad, 5 being the worst. It was a category 4. I was there for about a month, and then we moved into Irma, which hit Florida, Puerto Rico, and Virgin Islands, followed by Maria, which devastated Puerto Rico. So within the span of less than a month, our country was hit by 3 type 1 hurricanes, or excuse me, type 1 disasters. And disasters are typed, 1 being the worst of the worst, 2 being bad, 3 being it's manageable, but it's still a disaster. So what we found when we were deployed to these disasters was we experienced extreme competition for staff. About 10,000 of FEMA staff were all deployed, but that still wasn't enough staff to handle these disasters. So we had to utilize a lot of surge force capacity, which we were then deploying individuals from outside of FEMA that were still under the Department of Homeland Security department. We faced a lot of competition for supplies such as food, water, cots, and blankets, and space. Space was a big one. We had lack of lodging, which is usually hotels, for survivors as well as for FEMA staff. And we had a really difficult time finding facilities to operate out because you generally go outside of the impacted area to run your operations, but then you also have geographic branches, and finding facilities that weren't damaged and that were available was an extremely hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to explain the picture. So up at your top right, that is actually Hurricane Harvey that is hanging out over Texas. The picture immediately to the right, that was actually a picture I took as a passenger in a car traveling down towards the Austin area and the coast of Texas. Immediately below that, which was kind of ironic, was there was this bit everywhere there were signs saying avoid travel to the Texas coast, yet we were driving into that because that's what we did as FEMA employees. And then the last picture down at the bottom, that is actually my team. That is one of our exercises we did with Travis Air Force Base. So that was our team that responded to these disasters. So like I mentioned, there was a lot of resource scarcity. We didn't have enough staff, we didn't have enough supplies, and we didn't have enough space. So if you see the picture of the cruise ship, because we had lack of space for survivors as well as FEMA employees, survivors definitely were given priority for hotels and other housing. We never take that stuff away from survivors. So what had happened was FEMA had to contract out with cruise companies that would bring their crews into port, and our staff would stay on the cruise ships during the response. Up at the top right, that is actually an alternate care site that is set up for COVID right now in New York. Below that, that's what we call an air bridge. That's when supplies are flown to impacted areas. One of the best examples was providing supplies to Puerto Rico. It was a 24-hour-a-day air bridge to get supplies to them. And if you look down at the bottom left, that's actually a picture of the inside of a cargo plane with supplies. And then immediately next to that, that is Pete Gaynor. He is the administrator for FEMA. And again, this is him talking about, we're still dealing with COVID, but hurricane season starts June 1. So we need to be prepared for competing resources. So again, workforce. How do you supplement your workforce when you have 2 ongoing disasters? One great example is cross-training your staff. Can they do multiple functions? Are there ways that they can wear one hat one day and another hat the next day to kind of expand your capacity to respond? Something else is utilizing temporary agencies. Something that we have found that is great is utilizing temp agencies that focus on medical staff that are trained to respond to disasters. And we actually have a section in our emergency management toolkit that talks about credentialing staff. So if you haven't seen that, please, it's available on our website.
We've got a slide about it.
And we have a slide about it later, so we'll expand a little bit on that. You can also, well, one thing that FEMA ended up doing, and I've seen this done in with other jurisdictions, and it's not very popular among staff, but you cancel pre-approved vacations during a set time period. That way, again, you have all hands on deck. You can make sure that your capacity to respond is the best it can be. Utilizing interns is a great opportunity. If you provide some sort of wage for that, you'll get a lot more interest, and that's a great opportunity. It's less expensive for your organization, and it gives someone who's interested in maybe emergency management or healthcare an opportunity to gain some experience. Another option, hire some short-term staff, maybe 3-6 months that can cover you while we're going through these multiple disasters. You can also utilize contracts. Can you contract out certain functions like IT? Can you contract out accounting that will, that will remove some of the responsibility on you that you can give to a contractor, so that again, your core staff can focus on what needs to be done during these competing disasters. And then the other thing is an emergency management assistance compact, and we call those EMACs. So an EMAC, it's also called mutual aid sometimes. They're agreements between jurisdictions, which could be states, it could be cities, it could be regions, to provide supplemental aid to impacted jurisdictions in the form of staff, supplies, things like that. Many times during disasters, for example, like a tornado, only one jurisdiction will be impacted, so they can rely on those other jurisdictions to help them supplement their response and recovery efforts. It's used significantly in disasters, especially during hurricanes. So in 2007, I think it was every state, but I'm going to go on the record and say nearly every state in the United States was activated for an emergency management assistant compact to assist with that 2017 Atlantic hurricane response, because it was so vast. And if you look at the top picture, that is actually, when I was with the state of Alaska, we had to run response operations in the middle of winter out of what's called a Western shelter. And it's basically a tent that you set up that provides electricity and heating and things like that. So that was actually our response to a mudslide that was pretty horrific. And then down at the bottom, again, you're going to have PPE supplies that are going to be needed and things such as that. So when you come to supplies, the best thing that you can do now, a lot of these are lessons learned. Well, all of these are lessons learned from that 2017 hurricane season. And some of the things we found was stockpile ahead. What supplies do you think that you're going to need in hurricane season that you could utilize and stockpile right now for use so that you don't have to worry about that when a hurricane hits or another disaster hits? You can also utilize alternate vendors, and that's something that's important to do now. You could identify vendors that you haven't used before and develop relationships with them so that when you do need supplies, that's an alternate vendor that you can reach out to if your current vendor does not have the supplies that you need. Again, utilize our emergency management assistant compacts. If you haven't developed those with other organizations, that would be a great opportunity to do now. There's a lot of information out there about those. We could help you do that. So that might be something you want to consider.
And on the EMAC, the other thing is, people think it's just jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It's really, it can be with the private sector. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a public sector agency. So the whole point of mutual aid is identifying what you can provide in disaster. So if you're a hotel or you're a school or you're, or a utility agency, your skills are going to be needed. And you identify in advance the things that you want to, what you can supply and what your skills are and how you can support the community response.
Right. And again, that's something that we could do. We could provide you. That's a service that we provide to help you kind of figure out who you want to develop those agreements with and how to go about that. And again, utilize online resources to find supplies. Right now, a lot of websites have popped up that allow you to put in a supply you're looking for, and they have search engines that reach out to Amazon, Walmart, Costco, that look at what their inventory is, so you don't waste time trying to go somewhere and order supplies, but they'll tell you where the supplies are, what's available, and you can order it. PopCart is a pretty popular one right now for individuals looking for toilet paper, hand sanitizer. Popcart.com is a great resource for that. And then again, we all know that a lot of supplies are not available right now, but if you contact suppliers, many of them will have wait lists or put your order in now for when supplies do become available. And up at the top, that picture, that is a picture of, again, an alternate care site that is in New Jersey that I believe was used for Hurricane Sandy for sheltering. And then again, down at the bottom are just kind of a stockpile of supplies that a lot of organizations have or that states and jurisdictions have. And last, we want to talk about facilities and space. It's really important to identify multiple options for space if you need additional space to, to have a surge force of employees or extra storage or a way to treat patients. Now is the time to look at those options because those options may not be available once there's a competition for those coming in any time, whether it's hurricane season or tornado season, that sort of thing. And consider out-of-the-box options. I guess when we all think about facilities, we think about warehouses or office buildings, but there are many other out-of-the-box things that you could, or locations you could use, such as banquet halls. I know I've worked out of several banquet halls in hotels during my time. School gymnasiums are another one. For example, one disaster I was working, we could not find any space that could accommodate our staff within a 100-mile radius. So what we ended up doing was we found a wedding venue that had a huge barn that they used for weddings, and we started basing operations out of that barn until we could find a more appropriate venue. But it worked. It was tough, but it worked. And again, churches are another option. Again, you could look at sharing large spaces that will co-locating with another organization for a really large space would work. And it also provides a wider pool of options for you. And up at the top, again, those are pods that are being prepared in New York City. They're individual pods to treat patients during COVID. And down at the bottom, that is actually the outside of one of those Western shelters that I showed the inside of before. Again, they can be assembled by your current staff. It takes a little practice, but it works, and they're really, really valuable shelters to have out there.
Okay, now we're going to have Tony share with us talk about his hurricane experience and what those challenges were. Thank you so much, Tony.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to talk about hurricane experience, but I also want to emphasize that the utilities that I work for were in the Midwest and the East Coast. So besides the hurricane experience of going down to the Gulf Coast and assisting others, or even our own hurricanes, because we were on the New Jersey coast, you know, I've had countless engagements with tornadoes, ice storms, thunderstorms. It was just constant. Every year, we probably ramped up our EOC 4 to 6 times to address a major event, major weather event. I wanted to talk about the hurricanes because you know, they're so destructive. But just to talk and emphasize something that Amanda said, which was lessons learned. You know, storms are kind of the same in a lot. You can practice for that. You can do your exercises. You can be structured and prepared. But you have to be flexible enough that when the weather event throws you a curveball, your team can you know, revise their practices and be able to safely restore power, restore what other activity that your particular organization has. I think of a couple of these. You know, the second bullet point, Francis. You know, the issue there was fuel. Right before the hurricane, Florida had they dropped the tax so that it would get individuals driving throughout Florida more. And what it did is depleted the gas reserves, and then the storm came in. And that was huge for us. We literally had to make sure that when we found fuel, we were able to get that fuel, and then we had to make sure we conserved fuel. And it was a challenge for us because sometimes we would go in the area where we knew we were not going to have a gas station or any kind of fuel for hours. And in Hurricane Ivan, I've got those two in blue. That was the same assignment. We literally went to Daytona, restored power down there, and then Ivan came up. So we basically hunkered down, and then when Ivan hit, we then took off to the panhandle of Florida and Alabama and assisted. When I take a look at some of the other storms, you know, Ivan was a challenge because of the lodging. I think it was 85 or 90% of all the hotels and all the B&Bs were damaged. So they had to put up staging areas very quickly. There also was a lot of bridge damage, so it was very tough to get around. And it wasn't unusual for crews to have to just stay in their vehicles and sleep, which is never something that's you want to do, but if you have to, you have to. I talk about lessons learned. When we got down to Rita, again, the issue was fuel again, because of the refineries that were damaged down on the Texas coast. But luckily we had learned from Francis, so we started bringing our own tankers with us. So when we drove 1,000 miles to go down there and work, we had tankers with us. And when that one tanker got empty, it would head back, and it would actually go to either Kentucky or Ohio, refuel, and then we always had one on the property. So when you talk about lessons learned, that's something that we had to learn how to do. Sandy was an interesting storm. People don't realize it, but it was twice as wide as Katrina was. So the challenge there was that where sometimes you could drive a couple of hours and be able to get certain equipment or material, it was so huge and impacted such a large swath of the East Coast. Material you know, it became a little bit of a challenge, and we just had to make sure that we were able to get those resources in, but it also impacted so many utilities that there was a strain on resources and material. So we had to, all the utilities had to learn to share. And then of course, the Virgin Islands, the Irma and Maria restoration that took place, I had the opportunity to go down and served the governor as an advisor for power restoration. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here in the next couple of slides in regards to some of the challenges associated with that. If you want to go
Great.
forward on this, you want to go forward the slides? Okay, go ahead. All right,
Okay.
that's good. So when you take a look at some of the challenges, you know, we're talking about an island, but it can apply to some of the other, you know, really anything in the continental United States or even North America. But, you know, pre-deployment was very challenging. And we've seen that in the past too. A storm comes up and utilities aren't able to send help because they don't know if their own utility is going to get hit. And it was multiplied in the Virgin Islands because individuals, the launching point to get down to the Virgin Islands for trucks and resources and material was Florida, and it was in the crosshair, so that was tough. And then shipping challenges. We never had to deal with shipping before. Like Amanda, we've had people be flown in by military airlift aircraft, but on this one here, we had to depend on the shipping. And there's all kinds of regulations, but these regulations can also apply if you're crossing, if you're going to Canada or Canada's coming here to assist. There's certain rules and regulations. I'm sure if crews at a certain season were going to California because of the fear of some of the cross-contamination, but the USDA sometimes gets involved and you have to adhere to all those agricultural inspections. That's a couple-day process. So when you take a look at your planning, you've got to be able to build that in there. You know, U.S. Customs, that's no different than if crews come from Canada or we go to Canada. And let me say that it's people don't realize how many times the Canadian utility companies come down and assist the U.S., especially when you get a couple of disasters going at any one time. And the U.S. Customs has a process where it used to take a couple days. They now can process those crews in a couple of hours. And then, you know, airlifting. I had to learn the hard way in Virgin Islands, but you know, every lines person that comes down to work has got about 100 pounds of tools, and then they've got all their suitcases for a 2 or 30-day deployment. But the airlines actually restrict everything down to one bag because they are filling up their hull with cargo for the emergency. And we had to get, working through Washington, we had to get special exemption that our crews could bring their tools and their clothes with them, because without it, individuals were down there without the tools. And then there was competing resources. At the time of Irma and Maria, it had already come up and hit Puerto Rico and Florida, and then Harvey had already hit Texas the week before, 2 weeks before. So a lot of resource challenges there. And we had to work with everybody and you know, just make sure that the Virgin Islands was able to get their share. But again, I think of other challenges, and this is no different than being in the United States. If the East Coast, you know, take for instance Sandy, we had individuals from over 30 states on the East Coast helping with that mutual aid of Sandy. But what would have happened if something catastrophic would have happened on the West Coast? Those resources now are 3, 4, 5 travel days away, and what are you going to do? You're going to have to pull from maybe unconventional resources. You can plan all you want to, but again, having a good team together that can plan on the run can be critical, and you have to have your organizations flexible. Next slide. All right, so again, some of the challenges. That picture there is actually a hotel that they were wondering if we could stay in. So considering the whole side of it and the back of it was gone, that wasn't going to work. But you also have to be concerned for all your personnel. When you go somewhere, you have to make sure that you've got connectivity in your cells. They're going to be working out in the field. When we've went to emergencies, we've had to find out that maybe a hospital was damaged. So we knew that if someone got hurt, they weren't going to be going to that hospital, and we had to identify which hospital they would be going to, because many times they've told us that we had to self-transport because the system was so strained, ambulances were not going to be available. So this is all the proactive analysis we do and the intel we do once we hit the ground. Restaurants and stores not being open, again, having to deal with that many times. I didn't put it on here. Another one is curfews. Believe it or not, we've actually been in places where they've exempted utility workers from the curfew, but they didn't exempt the restaurant workers. So the restaurants were still closing at 6 or 7. And when our crews were trying to get fed, they could not do that. Again, going back to EOCs, working with them and telling them about that curfew limitation and why it needed to be changed. Like what Amanda was covering, cruise ships were brought in to house individuals because so many people, that cruise ship that was shown there, I think is a retired cruise ship that they brought down, FEMA brought down, and that is basically filled with utility workers and FEMA workers. It was the only way that really we could house those individuals. And then just some of the things you have to deal with, ports, container ports being congested, who has priority. Again, if you have a good relationship, working relationship with individuals, sometimes you have to go in there, and the example I'll use is that the military, of course, takes precedent, but we were able to go in and prove to the military that some of the containers that were coming in for us were going to be put into service. What they contained was going to be put into service within hours, where some of the containers that were being brought in by others were going to sit for 30 days before they were needed. The military helped us prioritize that. So that's just some of the high level issues you have to deal with. But again, you can exercise, you can plan, but you have to be able to be flexible and address what curveballs are thrown at you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. We really appreciate it. Now I want to talk about, we've been talking about past events, that we look back at hurricanes, et cetera, severe weather events. And now we're in the time of COVID, as we all know. I'm sure the last thing you want to talk about, because it's something it's kind of an impact of our every waking moment, but the COVID-19 is here to stay. And these are the 2 pandemic phases. Obviously, we are well past the 1 to 3, and we're in the widespread human infection phase 5 to 6, and we will be there, unfortunately, for the future until we get this state. We want, hopefully, this is the peak, and we want to have those numbers go down. But in terms of what you need to do and think about planning, so we don't know how long, we're still learning every day about the virus itself, how it affects the body, how it affects communities, how it affects a whole lot, our mental health, et cetera. But the pandemic phases are just important to know for you to understand that there's actually some curve to it. And so the pandemic phase of 5 to 6 is where we are right now. And as much as we want to flatten the curve, we might see when we get out of, are we going to be in the post-peak phase? Are we going to get where we get a reoccurrence? A lot of people are talking about a surge in the fall. We're hoping that the summer, we don't see those same trends because we have stay-at-home orders across the country, but those are now being lifted in many places. So that post-peak phase, what may happen is that we see that post-peak phase will happen when people go, oh, well, I'm going to go back to my regular life. I'm going to go back to doing all the things I want to do. And but it's going to be quite a while, I think. What we can tell you is until we have a vaccine, we're not going to get to the post-pandemic transition. But as you all know, we've been dealing with COVID-19 stay-at-home orders across the country for 2 months or more now. We're already in some ways the post-pandemic transition in that already things have changed dramatically in your workday, in your family life, et cetera, and we're going to continue to see that. But there is some phases to that, and these are pretty much standard, whether this was, the 1918 influenza pandemic or now we're COVID, et cetera, but that's sort of what that process is like. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, now we have COVID. That's a painful situation that we're in, but we also are facing other disasters in 2020, much as those, June 1, as Amanda said, of the opening of hurricane season. CDC put out some guidance on COVID-19 planning during the hurricane season. So we wanted to make sure that that was available to you so you know what that was like. So what we're facing for this year is we have COVID-19, we have hurricane season, which is slated to be very active, which is not a good thing to know, but it's good to know ahead of time. So again, that planning, we're all about planning for the next stage. We know that severe weather events such as tornadoes and ice storms have already happened this spring. It snowed in New York City last weekend, so we know those ice storms and snowstorms continue to happen. We know that the 2020 wildfire season is slated to cause far more fires and public safety power shutoff events. Those are the things that we had for the first time ever in California. We don't know if they're going to go across the other parts of the West, where they also have large wildfire threats. But with public safety power shutoffs, your power is shut off. Well, if you're sheltering at home, you're counting on internet to work, you're counting on maybe you're a ventilator dependent patient, that planning has to happen. Unfortunately, it's always earthquake season. We never quite know when that will be. And then believe it or not, 90% of all disasters are flood related. You go, really? Because there's all these other disaster threats. Well, a flood could be related to a storm surge from a hurricane. It could be related to too much rain, and too much rain, which means a dam or a levee break and those kinds of things. So it doesn't hurt to think about how it's not that hard to figure out what those. But 90% of all disasters are flood related. So things that you have to put in your planning, putting it in the hopper, so to speak. So I want to talk a little bit about some planning, COVID-19 plus planning, we'll call it that. Like COVID-19 plus hurricanes, plus PSPS events, plus wildfire, and those planning considerations. Something for you to think about now is what your personal and community evacuation planning. Again, if you're in a hurricane, and how are you going to evacuate if your home is how are you going to have to get out in some ways? How do you need to evaluate what your COVID-19, you may need to evacuate a healthcare facility. Where will they go? Because you can't just take a 200-bed hospital, with you're dealing with already very sick and frail and vulnerable patients with COVID-19. Where are they going to go? So thinking again, going back to what that both Tony and Amanda touched on, figuring out those facilities, where are they going to go? You got to figure that out now. On the sheltering, now is time to identify alternate shelter sites and develop a system for COVID-19 populations and non-COVID. So are you going to be doing screenings? Are you going to be doing temp checks for everybody? You can't just put everybody in a high school gym and call it a day. If you've got COVID-19 asymptomatic patients that are going to spread, you're going to have, that's going to turn into an entire COVID shelter. So figuring out those systems and policies and process in your communities about what sheltering looks like. Again, multiple vendors for key supplies. Have you already figured that out? Are you planning for these things? Because you want to be able to count on, maybe you're counting on a supplier that's overseas. Well, they're now dealing with COVID as well. Maybe you need that for manufacturing, but maybe the goods and services providers that you rely on every day, maybe they're also going to be impacted in different ways. Maybe the IT provider that you've been using for years is a small business that isn't coming back. And you need these critical services, identifying multiple vendors that can serve. So you think plan A, plan B, and maybe you do C or D, depending if those things are critical to your operation or your community or your government, local government. So figuring those things out ahead of time. So COVID-19 is just putting strains on already strained systems. So being patient, but figuring and giving yourself a lot of leeway to figure out what's next. Do you have an alternate staffing plan? The reason I say this is in COVID-19, in traditional pandemic planning, you have to plan for 30% of your staff not being able to come in. And so the temp agencies that Amanda talked about, the temp agencies or the interns or using personnel from other like organizations, or do you need volunteers? So figuring that out about what your alternate staffing plan pattern might be. So figuring out a pattern of, okay, if we've got to serve this many patients, or we've got to do, a different way of still getting our core operations done, how do we do that? And it's by putting together an alternate staffing plan. You're not sure how to do that, let us know. We do that all the time. The other consideration for COVID-19 plus events, how will you handle vulnerable populations during COVID and public safety power shut? We saw that those happened last fall, those PSPS events. Sorry, I'll not to use too many acronyms, but the public safety power shut off event really meant that seniors who were living in the dark, so maybe they were ventilator dependent, but no power meant, they're oftentimes they don't use cell phones. They use cordless phones that aren't plugged in, and you couldn't reach people. So those small things about how are you going to handle dealing with COVID-19, identifying those folks, and then when public safety power shut off, are you going to need more disaster modeling? Are you going to need to do some GIS mapping of where potential vulnerable populations are? Are there senior services, et cetera? Are they going to need additional assistance? And has your community figured that out? And then we want to think the bright side of getting to when there's a vaccine available. Do you have a plan for distributing it to your staff and their families? And maybe your facility, maybe your school, and maybe your school actually can get the vaccine as long as you're working with your local health department. Do you have a plan for figuring that out and distributing it? So we can help you with that as well. How will you evacuate and shelter hurricane victims? That's going to be a tough thing. They can't just go home because they don't have homes, and they're dealing with, and they're trying to shelter in place. No. And then how will you meet social distancing guidelines during the sheltering? How to manage an actual disaster. How are emergency managers in the room how are they going to still meet social distancing guidelines and stay-at-home orders and manage COVID-19 plus events? So we gave you a lot of questions, but the whole point of thinking of, do you have an idea about, have you thought about these things? So we want to give you also some strategies that we find that might be helpful for you. Are you prepared? Now is the time to create, if you haven't already done so, and update your personal preparedness, your business, your government emergency plans. So you're going, well, I'm in the middle of a disaster of COVID and I have to update my plan. Yes, this is the perfect time, because you probably already have lessons learned from the last, for 2020 and since COVID's been with us. Now is an opportunity to look at those plans and find out what's going to work best. So train your staff on what those updated plans are. If you need some help with that, we certainly can. But also conduct tabletop exercises, which are discussion-based exercises to identify what logistical and operational needs are to address the COVID plus hurricanes or wildfires or severe weather or floods. So tabletop exercises, now is a really good time to do training and exercises. Yes, we're in the middle of a disaster, but we know that it's going to be more challenging with these upcoming events that we're facing, and it's a way for you to be ready. Okay. So we want to share and see if we have questions or comments. Can you share with us sort of like either your questions and or comments about planning for multiple disasters? Does anyone want to share or have questions about how you do things? Well, we certainly want you to share questions, and if you don't have questions, that's certainly fine. But we hope that you comment. Here are some things for you to think about. We're trying to give you some food for thought, and you're like, okay, I already have plenty of things on my mind. Sheesh. You know, you're giving me something else to do. So think about in the future. Here's some things to think about. We think that would be. We just want to give you some opportunities. We also want to say that we have some offers for you. We have developed for healthcare organizations updated CMS, which is Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Emergency Preparedness Compliance Toolkit. That is now available. We're really excited. It just got released. It's brand spanking new. There's new changes for those of you in healthcare that all the changes from the omnibus burden reduction conditions of participation final rule. They came out last fall. We were in the process of updating it, and then COVID-19 happened, so we got waylaid a little bit. But it's streamlined. It's more user-friendly toolkit. It's got a great new provider reference chart for all the changes. So if you want to know if you're a dialysis clinic or skilled nursing facility or community health center, all the requirements that you have. We also have a whole updated training, drill, and exercise resources. And we've thrown in as a bonus, our pandemic planning response guide. And we wanted to offer as well 4 hours of consulting. So it's $700. That hot link there at the bottom, you can go purchase it right now. It's a direct download. But our goal is to give you the resources and tools to be able to support your planning process as best as possible. So for you to meet the compliance requirements, because at some point, CMS is going to come survey you. They're going to want to know what your plans look like. But more importantly, all the tools and resources. The other thing is with COVID-19, it will count towards an activation and count towards your exercise requirements. So it gives you the tools for you to have the after action report forms and such so that you can count that as your exercise. So a little bit about us. We've been in business since 2009. We were named the Women-Owned Business of the Year in 2018. But we do pandemic planning, response, recovery planning, alternate care site, and evacuation planning. We've done that as well. There's kind of a whole laundry list of things that we do. If you're an organization that wants to know more of how we might be able to help you, or if you have an RFP, a response for request for quote or request for proposal coming up, please let us know so that we can provide you a proposal and share it with you, because we've got a great group of folks that can assist you. Are you figuring out reopening? We can assist with that as well as drills and exercises. We have several master exercise practitioners. We have Tony, but we also have our training and exercise specialist that's also a master exercise practitioner. Also, active shooter and workplace violence. Believe it or not, there's quite a lot of issues related to mental health and a lot of strain and stress. So unfortunately that we can assist with de-escalation, etc. If you want more information from us, you can book a call. That's the link right there. You also can register for our future webinars. We're doing another one next month, so we'll share with you that information. You can always go and you signed up for us today, and we'll keep you apprised of future webinars. If you want to join our monthly newsletter, you can go to that link. If you need a speaker or a trainer for your organization via webinar. We do that all the time for organizations, and happy to do the same for you. And this is our contact information. If you have further questions, we really hope that this has been a helpful process for you of figuring out of what you need to plan for and what's ahead. And, you know, looking back is our best way of understanding what we're facing in the future. I want to say thank you so much, Tony, for weighing in, and Amanda. Any last words, Amanda?
I guess I would say, you know, the more effort and time that you put into planning and mitigation strategies, the less the impact will be on your organization when a disaster hits. Preparedness and mitigation are the keys to a successful response and recovery.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Tony, any last words?
No, I just want to emphasize the exercises and drills. Over my career, our utility did it religiously, and it's what made us capable of being able to not only respond in force, but also be adaptable.
Great. Thank you so much. Exactly right. And we're here to be able to support you. So let us know how we can reach out. Thank you so much for joining us. We really do spend, you know, we know that you're busy and you spend time with us today. We appreciate it, and reach out if we can help. Thank you.